It started with a burp, just a quiet one after dinner. But then came the burning in his chest. Again, Walter Jennings, 70 years old and freshly retired, slowly leaned back in his chair and rubbed his sternum. He had just finished one of his favorite meals, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. But once again, the acid was rising like clockwork. Every time, he muttered to himself, "You'd think a man my age would be used to this by now." He wasn't. Not the heartburn, not the bloating, not the tired sore knees when he climbed out of bed in the morning. What bothered Walter the most wasn't the pain. It was how ordinary it all felt. Like discomfort had become part of his identity. But then came a memory. He was reaching into the kitchen cabinet one night, searching for antacids, when he spotted a little orange box shoved into the corner. Baking soda. His mother used to sip a little in warm water when her stomach went sideways, as she called it. Just half a teaspoon, she'd say. It calms things down inside. Walter stared at the box. Could it really help after all these years? Walter sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the early morning light stretch slowly across his backyard. At 67, mornings had become his favorite time, quiet, predictable, and calm. But over the past few years, even that peace had started slipping away. The heartburn had been the worst part, showing up like an uninvited guest after nearly every meal. At night, it would creep in just as he tried to drift off to sleep, forcing him upright with that hot, familiar burn in his chest. He'd tried antacids, changed his meals, even gave up his evening cup of tea. Nothing really stuck. It was frustrating. He didn't need miracles, just a little relief. Just something that worked. Then he remembered a conversation from his neighbor, an old friend who once mentioned something odd. Half a teaspoon of baking soda in water. Old trick my dad swore by. Walter had laughed it off at the time. But now, well, he figured it couldn't hurt. So the next morning, with the house still quiet and the sun barely peeking over the trees, he walked into the kitchen. He filled a glass with water, opened the box of baking soda he hadn't touched in months, and measured out half a teaspoon. The powder swirled and dissolved slowly as he stirred. He raised the glass, hesitated just for a second, and drank. It tasted strange. Flat, a little salty, but not terrible. He waited. Nothing happened. No fireworks. No sudden change. The day went on like any other. He had lunch, his usual sandwich and soup, and to his surprise, that familiar burn didn't come. That night, for the first time in a while, he slept straight through. No tossing, no heartburn, just sleep. He didn't want to get ahead of himself. But as the days passed, the pattern held. By midweek, he was walking to the mailbox with less stiffness in his knees. He could stand from his recliner without pausing to stretch or wince. It wasn't magic. It was slow, quiet. But for Walter, it felt like something he hadn't had in a long time. Hope. The doctor notices something too. 3 weeks had passed, and Walter found himself once again in the sterile, familiar space of his doctor's office. The fluorescent lights above hummed gently, and the subtle scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. He sat quietly on the examination table, legs dangling, hands clasped together, just as he had done for years. At 72, Walter had grown used to these checkups, too used to the quiet sighs of concern, the numbers that never seemed to go the right way, and the gentle warnings about salt, sugar, pressure, and pills. It had become a routine, one where he mostly listened and nodded, feeling more like a passenger than the driver of his own health. But today was different. As Dr. Lin scrolled through his latest results, her brow furrowed, not with concern, but with curiosity. She turned to him, her voice calm but tinged with surprise. "Your blood pressure, it's holding steady," she said, tapping her pen on the chart. "And your kidney function has improved a little. What's changed, Walter?" Walter gave a short chuckle and scratched the back of his head. "You're not going to believe me," he said, "but I've been drinking baking soda water, just a bit in the morning, every day." There was a pause. Walter expected her to laugh or wave it off like some old wives' tale. But she didn't. Instead, Dr. Lin nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "Actually, that makes some sense. There's research on that, especially when it comes to acid reflux and kidney health. Just keep an eye on your sodium, okay?" Walter blinked. That moment landed quietly but heavily in his chest. For once, it wasn't just numbers getting worse or pills being added. For once, something he did had worked. He wasn't just managing illness. He was participating in his healing. As he left the office, coat slung over his arm, there was a quiet pride in his step. Not because he had found some miracle, but because he had chosen to care for himself differently, deliberately. That day, Walter didn't feel old. He felt in control. Walter never expected much to change. At 67, he had made peace with his daily aches. The stiff knees in the morning, the sluggish afternoons, the quiet frustration of feeling just a little less like himself each year. But still, when his daughter mentioned that a glass of water with a bit of baking soda might help his digestion, he figured, why not? So he tried it. 1 glass, each morning, before breakfast. He didn't expect miracles. But after a few weeks, something strange happened. He didn't need his antacids anymore. The burning after dinner, the uncomfortable bloating that made his belt feel 2 sizes too small, they simply faded. Gone. Even more surprising, his gout attack stopped. That old pain in his big toe, sharp, red, and swollen, used to make him limp around the house for days. But now it barely whispered. He could walk to the corner store again without wincing. His wife, June, noticed something too. Not his toe, but his breath. It was fresher. No more mints before their evening strolls. She didn't say much, just smiled a little more often as they walked, hand in hand. Like they used to. Walter had more energy. He started walking longer routes in the park. And when he came home, he didn't collapse into the recliner like before. His sleep deepened. He didn't wake up 3 times a night anymore. His mind felt clearer. And the skin on his arms, those dry, itchy patches that made him scratch without thinking, started to soften. He began soaking them in warm water with a spoonful of baking soda. Simple, gentle, and for the first time in years, his skin felt like his own again. Was it a miracle? No, but it was real, and it was enough. Margaret had always believed that growing old just came with discomfort. Stiff joints in the morning, a tired back by the afternoon, nights that passed slowly, not from insomnia, but from a body that couldn't quite rest. She thought she was just supposed to live with it. But now, in her 70s, Margaret sometimes sat quietly and wondered, why didn't anyone tell me sooner? No one had explained how some of the pain wasn't just from age, but from inflammation that had built up quietly over time. No one had mentioned that a simple warm compress in the evening, or a daily walk after breakfast, could reduce that swelling and even help her sleep better. No one had told her that her morning cup of tea, if chosen carefully, could support her digestion and ease the bloating that had frustrated her for years. Like Walter, she didn't throw away her prescriptions. She still followed her doctor's advice, but she also began to see how small, thoughtful choices could bring comfort, how the right information, shared kindly and clearly, could change the way her days felt. Now, Margaret keeps a little notebook by her kitchen table, not for recipes, but for reminders about things that help. Gentle stretches, herbal teas, simple breathing exercises. These aren't magic fixes, but to Margaret, they're like steady hands guiding her through the days. And every time she feels a little better, a little more at ease, she wishes someone had told her sooner. Walter's morning routine hadn't changed in years. The world outside could spin faster, the neighborhood kids could grow taller, and the seasons could blur together. But his mornings? They stayed the same. He would rise with the light, not an alarm. No rush, no fuss. In the kitchen, he reached for the small jar he kept near the sink. A simple glass jar, worn from years of use, holding nothing fancy, just plain baking soda. He measured it carefully. Half a teaspoon. No more. No less. Then, 1 glass of room temperature water. Not cold, not hot, just calm and gentle, like the mornings he had come to cherish. He stirred it slowly, the spoon clinking softly against the glass. Then he took a sip. Sip. Breathe. Smile. He didn't gulp it, didn't chase it with vitamins or supplements. Just 1 sip at a time, like a quiet moment of reflection. He had read about the benefits. Of course, how something so simple could help with digestion, how it might balance the body's pH. But that wasn't really why he kept doing it. It was the ritual, the act of doing something small for himself. Because now, in this stage of life, Walter had learned something he never quite understood when he was younger. Health doesn't have to be complicated. It's not always about chasing the next miracle cure or reinventing your body overnight. Sometimes it's just about consistency, awareness, respect for the little things. For Walter, that half teaspoon wasn't just about physical health. It was a daily reminder. A reminder that his choices still mattered. That even at 72, he could still take charge of his body, his mornings, his peace. And maybe most importantly, that aging wasn't about giving up. It was about getting wiser, knowing what works, letting go of what doesn't, and appreciating the quiet power of routine. So every morning, Walter repeated his simple ritual. And with every stir, every sip, and every small smile in the morning light, he reminded himself, I'm still here, I still matter, and I still have the power to care. It was just past 7 a.m. when Walter strolled into the park, his steps steady and sure, the cool morning air brushing against his face. The sun was just starting to break through the trees, casting a soft golden light on the path ahead. Walter liked it this way, quiet, peaceful, and just busy enough with other early risers nodding hellos and sharing the rhythm of another new day. As he reached the bench near the old oak tree, he saw a familiar figure waving him over. George. Same cap, same cane, same crooked smile. They hadn't seen each other in a few months, but somehow it always felt like no time had passed. Walt, George called, chuckling as he stood to greet him. You're walking like you left the clock 10 years behind. What's your secret? Walter grinned and held up his water bottle like it was some kind of prize elixir. This, he said simply. George raised an eyebrow. What's in it? Baking soda, Walter replied. George blinked. You're kidding. Nope, just a pinch every morning. There was a silence. Not judgmental, just surprised. George squinted at the bottle, then at Walter. What does it taste like? Medicine. Walter gave a small shrug. Tastes like something I should have started 10 years ago. George laughed again, but softer this time. Not out of disbelief, but out of curiosity. Walter looked different. Not younger exactly, but lighter. Less stiff. Less weighed down by the things that had slowly become normal. The aches, the acid, the restless sleep. They sat for a moment, the sounds of birds and breeze filling the quiet. George looked at his old friend, and then down at his own cup of coffee, still steaming in the morning chill. His fingers tightened a bit around it. Maybe it wasn't about the baking soda. Not entirely. Maybe it was about taking one small thing seriously again. One small change that said, I still care about how I feel. I'm not done yet. He looked back at Walter. Tomorrow, he said, I might just bring a different cup,